Hi everyone, it's Martha Novak. Have to always wait for that music to finish playing. We are here today to continue our series on being vulnerable. If you have been listening to other shows, you'll realize that there is a lot of information about how to be more vulnerable. Might not sound like a good thing either to the uninitiated, but it is the oneness with all life. And you're listening to a show on consciousness to certainly achieve that later soon in your lives. It's a marvelous thing, I can guarantee you. That's why the study of consciousness is still around after thousands of years. So, we're going to be talking about today, we're going to be finishing up shame and guilt and going into self-forgiveness, even in more detail. And there's another step, or two or three, right behind this. So the series is going to continue until we certainly cover the major aspects of being vulnerable. Dear ones, we are delighted that you're with us. This is a live show today. Our guest call-in number is 347-850-1647. That's 347-850-1647. I certainly love when you all ask questions, and I love to take comments about what we're talking about, stories that you have, or anything else. The nice thing about doing your own show is you don't have to finish on time. Now, we've got 90 minutes, of course, but that's what I mean. If we don't finish with what I have prepared, we'll save it till next week. So we'll be fine. Thank you for joining us today. And I'm always looking forward to this show. Let's do a quick prayer to get ourselves all in line with what we are trying to learn today. And what we're saying. Dear God, who is all there is, you who are all we are, and all everything is in the world, we thank you so much. And we now open ourselves to see, hear, sense, and know what you would have us do on the highest levels of our being. We open the ascended mind in us that we may be one with you for these 90 minutes and beyond, if we so choose. And we ask that we be open and aware to the next steps in our lives that you are calling us to. We thank you so much for all of this. And now we say that we relinquish knowing anything. For it's the you through us and through all things that know it all on a much higher level than our brains can ever comprehend. So thank you, dear God. And we say this prayer in your name, in the name of the Ascended Masters, our love-centered guides and friends, and in the name of each and every person listening to the show. Thank you, and so it is. All right, guys. So, as usual, I see what the internet has to say about this. I agree or refute it. Or in many cases in consciousness, we use more specific language and go deeper. So that's not to say our program is anything but different. It is different. That's all. Not better, not worse. But, to the end of consciousness, we are not in the business of just psychology, just business, just any kind of metaphysical energy work. We are in the business of consciousness itself, and that does take sometimes a different language. So, one of the articles that I pulled was The Healthy Way to Forgive Yourself. It was published in Mind and Body magazine, and it's by Juliana Brienz, I think would be the way you would pronounce her name, or Brienz. Nice article, very nice. So if you want to read it yourself, by all means. But we're going to go beyond it today because we have lots of things to say. Glad you're with us. Years and years ago, when I was probably in my 20s, I had and I don't know how I did this, probably crawling through the brush. I love to, do garden things. I had a great big cut from my knee all the way down to my ankle. Oh, it wasn't anything serious. It was just a cut, like a thorn had sliced me all the way down or something. Typical. And by the time I saw this friend of mine, the skin infection was very, it was an infected area, red, nothing horrible, but red for certain, obviously neglected. And I went to my friend, and I was late having lunch with her. This was, by the way, when I was much thinner and I was wearing shorts. And I told her this story, which was true, about my dog that morning having a thorn in its paw, and I was late because I was looking around for that thorn, which I found, and extracted. She looked at my knee and my scar, and she said, "And what have you done for that?" I'm telling you this story for several reasons. First of all, certainly, it leads into the fact that we neglect ourselves when we are not forgiving of ourselves. But I'm telling it for a different reason, which is the awareness that there was something to be done that I didn't do. That comes before actually doing it, of course. That we sometimes, in our zeal to keep going, we will take care of others, we'll completely neglect ourselves. That's not part of this spiritual way. I often see it happening with clients, so I wanted to put on the table right away that taking care of ourselves in a wholesome, accepting, and forgiving way is really an important part to being vulnerable. Because if you don't forgive yourself and others, of course, the hardest one is yourself. If we don't accept, if we don't get over our shame and our guilt about things and make those things right in some way, we're going to talk about that in more detail this week. These are tremendous burdens that the individual carries around their whole lives. So let's dive in to some of our information. And, oh, hello, Kat. Good morning. Guys, those of you who are listening on Blog Talk Radio, I want you to know that people are writing me on Facebook Live. And I see a lot of familiar faces and people I'm very fond of. So it's really nice to reconnect on Sunday mornings with you all. Self-forgiveness is extremely important, certainly to our well-being, for many other things. You're going to hear certainly more about this as we go. But there are some things that very much have to be, hello, Dorothy. Good morning, sweetie, yourself. There are certain things that we must make sure goes along with self-forgiveness. For example, we need being responsible for ourselves and accountable for what we did. And then, by the way, we have to be willing to implement some action around it. Now, you're going to hear about this in more detail as we go, because sometimes it's very obvious what action we should take. Maybe we should go and apologize, okay, and work through the problem and learn to work through it together. But there are other times where it's not so obvious. Maybe the person has died. Maybe we can't find them at all. Maybe we've all moved on with our lives and we still feel sad and guilty and maybe ashamed of something in the past. We're going to talk about what to do about that, because there are some things to do, rather than sweep it under the rug and say we have forgiven ourselves when we haven't. That's a mistake. Not a mistake, and when I say that, it's not a mistake judgmentally. I want you all to know when I'm doing this, and after years of practice, I'm going to say, I don't have any judgment about what you're doing. You do it until you don't do it anymore. We all do. I remember a man that was a thief, believe it or not. And he came to me and he was very ashamed of being a thief. I can't give him moral judgments. I can't flick a switch and say, don't thieve anymore. But he wanted to work on it, and indeed he did. I was real proud of him. And one day, he didn't want to ever do that again. And he went about trying to make some certain things right. And I was very proud of him. We do it until we don't. And how we don't is to do some work on ourselves, to realize our motivations and what we're doing, to realize the higher self that we are, have more and more that strengthened, our sense of self and who we are, beyond the mistakes we make. Sometimes, guys, we so narrow our focus and only see the mistakes we made. And instead of just realizing they're mistakes we make, right, which is a guilt about something we did, we pathologically cross the line into shame and say, I'm bad, and this is who I am. That's a self-attack. And that's why we get in trouble. That's an entrenchment. When we cross that line into I have done, into I am, and into the self-attack, that's a problem. So we've got to really undo those pieces, you see? Good. Certainly non-forgiveness of ourselves results in stress. Pardon me. There's something blooming around here, and I get choked. It goes into stress and anxiety and depression, reduced health in all sorts of manners. It can lead to suicide. Dear God, how horrible. Not moralistically horrible. I just feel sorry for those of us that are left when people do that. Eating disorders, substance abuse, self-criticism, blame, self-sabotage. You know, sometimes people, when they don't know how to handle their emotions, they turn against the very people that love them. They pick fights. They, relieve their anxiety in this very self-sabotaging manner instead of just being loving friends and family members. Rage sometimes is part of this. The belief that you do not deserve anything, and acting out over and over again, which is a lot of criminal activity. And certainly, one of the major problems with all of these lists that I'm giving you is they are repeated. They become patterns we repeat in our lives. And this must be broken. Certainly, in my opinion, it is broken by consciousness studies quite a lot. I'm sure there are other ways. I mean, if you have a religious bent, certainly your religion might keep you in line. Certainly, this is what psychology does. It tries to stop destructive behavior. We do it in our way, in consciousness, by making you aware of all the ramifications of things and where you could go, where the water is stiller, so you can take your boat there and have a more peaceful life and contribute to the whole of society with your wisdom. I also want to put on the table, I'm putting some general points on the table right now before we actually go into some tips. Many people think they have forgiven themselves or other people when they have not at all. They've simply avoided it, or they pathologically, and these things could go together, pathologically shut down their emotions around it and shut down a lot of emotions that kind of get swept up in this by association. They cut part of their energy off. This reduces empathy for others. That will never get us where we want to go, which is the oneness with all life. We certainly have to have empathy to do that. It also takes away any chance, when we cut ourselves off like that, it takes away any chance of our working through a problem, learning how to work through problems, which is, by the way, emotional maturity. We have to learn to work through problems, not only our own problems internally, but we need to certainly work through problems with other people. We have to learn to do that. This article said that self-forgiveness is not a crutch. And she went on to say that sometimes it is a crutch. You put it under your arms and you become very self-righteous and you say, of course, I've forgiven myself or you, when you haven't at all. I want to say, as someone who works with consciousness, that falseness usually is exposed. It might be exposed to the public, but it certainly is, without a doubt, exposed to you. Now, when that falseness is exposed, when we find we are not forgiving at all of ourselves or others, we have a couple of choices. We can do something about it right away and set it right. We can learn from it with some of the tips that I'm going to give you today. Or we can shut down and repeat the pattern and avoid it, don't look at it, don't do anything about it. Yep. You know, I have laughed for a long time. I used some silly images. Here's one. Here's a silly image. Let's say you look in the mirror and your hair looks like it's doing its own interpretive dance. All right, you look bad. Hair everywhere. Kind of like today. Anyway, what do? You fix the hair that's out of place, right? That's what you do. But you don't stand there and yell at the mirror or turn away and not look. You make yourself presentable, right? Well, guys, this is certainly a metaphor for what we're talking about here. What happens in a lot of cases when you find that you do not self-forgive, you have looked in the mirror, you found yourself in some way unacceptable, and you either yell at the mirror or you take all the mirrors down and don't look, instead of fixing the problem. It really is like that. Now, it's much more psychologically complicated than that. But I think that's a pretty good image, silly though it may be. Okay. It's very important to work on yourself, to discover more about yourself and why you are motivated to do what you're doing and why you keep repeating the pattern. There are lots of layers to get through. It's all fascinating. It's all about you. Most people that do begin this work begin it for the wrong reasons. And then, not that there are wrong reasons. The wrong reasons turn out to be right reasons, of course, because you've started. I certainly did that. Years and years and years ago, I started working on myself because what I recognized in my unawareness was that my acting, my writing, my creativity, I've always been very performance-oriented no matter what I was doing, whether I was painting, writing, acting, was the only word I had for it was tight. I was tight. Well, it was because I was hiding. It was because I wasn't real. It was because I was presenting a false self. You're always anxious. If you're presenting a false self, people may see beyond it. I'm lucky because several people did in my life. I remember those times beautifully. An old director that I had came to see me in a tremendous success that I had had in a show. And we walked out to the car together at night. You know, he was being such a gentleman. And he was such a kind man. But he was no nonsense. And he looked at me in that darkened parking lot. And he had a loving smile on his face. And he said, "Martha, Why are you so happy? And you know what? I felt completely exposed because he could see I wasn't, and I wasn't being honest with myself. Made me start asking some questions for sure. And other experiences like that made me start asking questions. Guys, you have experiences like that in your life. It will cause you to hide more who you really are, or it will cause you to get on the journey that I went on for myself. Yours will be different. Yours will be yours. And start finding out who you really are. Much easier there, gotta tell you. Now, before we begin our discussion on this, I want to say one more time to you, which I did in the beginning of the show, and I did in other shows. We must know the difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is about something that happened, something we did, right? And it could be about us personally, or something that society did of which we are part of, or a group did of which we are part, and it could be just about what we did, right? And it can also propel us. Guilt can be a good thing, can be. It can also propel us into action to make that right in some way. However, remember there's that pathological line. And this is what we must realize, because most people cross it. So guilt becomes shame. When it becomes shame, it's an entrenchment. An entrenchment is always repeated, right? So you feel ashamed. You say, I am bad. I am whatever the adjective is, weak. I am whatever. I am mean, instead of I did a mean thing. I've done 5 mean things. So you self-condemn. You self-attack. And shame has got to be resolved if you are going to forgive yourself. We're going to talk about all of that. Okay. Let's give you some tips, shall we? The first tip is to take guilt and don't try to get rid of it. Most people, we all grow up thinking God is there in the good times and it's not there in the bad times, right? Therefore, a lot of people from their childhood really are nervous about what to do when they feel bad. They don't know that that's something to work through. And you say, I don't know how. And I say, well, that's wonderful. You'll learn. That's one of the things that we do as adults as we come into our emotional maturity, is we learn how to work through problems. If you don't know how to do that, there's nothing wrong with you. You just didn't learn that, and now's the time to learn that. But what you often do is self-vilify, you see? Self-condemn, instead of saying, I have something to learn here, let's go to somebody that will help me with this so I can learn. Let me stop here and say, you know that there are 2 parts of you, and this is the confusing thing about God, too, and the confusing thing about yourself, is there are 2 parts of you. These parts we very much work with here at my company when we're working with you. We work with the egoic child's mind. This is the part of you that thinks like a child. This is your lesser self. That's not a condemnation that there's anything wrong with it. It's just not the potential. That's all. It's not the energy of potential. This is a fear-based part of you. This is the part of you that thinks like a child. It started about 18 months old, along when you created the ego. Before 18 months old, by the way, all time is now. So something uncomfortable or bad or scary happens to you before 18 months old. You think, life is going to be this way for the rest of my life, but you've forgotten that. You forgot you thought that because that was beyond and before you formed words. So the ego and the ego child's mind comes along to say reality and this moment is scary, and it helps you project into the future and see if you're safe. And it's based on your being hurt in the past. So the fact that you're projecting into the future is really the past, projecting past, back to the past. It's all about the past, running your present and future. And so you don't stay in this moment of now. And so that's why I think mindfulness is a wonderful thing. I love all the mindfulness studies out there. Most people can't do it because there's some things to put in place first within us. And that is the acceptance of what is and the knowing that we can work through our own problems. And therefore we can take accountability for what we did. And we can fix things right here, right now. And that we, the good God being all we are in our highest self, we together are controlling our experience. We're creating this. You see. I hope you see how that works. All right. So, going back to this tip, we said you don't want to get rid of guilt. You want to learn from it. You don't want it to cross that pathological line. So stay with guilt. Try to define what you're guilty about, which is about a circumstance, something you did or did not do, by the way. It could be a sin of commission or omission. Sometimes we'll be guilty about that. And you need to realize if you have let that go into shame, we need to address that. And how do we fix that? Well, in consciousness studies, you find out who you authentically are. There's never been consciousness without compassion, too. So compassion comes right along with it. Not only compassion for the person you harmed, but compassion for yourself, which is maybe the person you harmed. Okay. We must not tell ourselves we are bad, we are worthless, because of the pathology of shame. I think it's extremely important to say, yes, I am ashamed. Why not? It's a human condition. It's part of your wisdom once you fix this. And by the way, wisdom becomes then part of your value to society. It becomes part of your contribution with whatever you're going to do in life. So you're truncating this marvelous flow of what your life should be when we deny or avoid or even commit violence to keep ourselves away from the truth of us. I always say when people self-loathe, they haven't seen themselves. If you saw yourself, truly saw yourself, authentically and well, you'd find nothing but our good and gracious living God right there with you. And certainly a lot of progressive, higher thought and kindness and a larger truth than the one we know right now. That's really important. Doing bad things does not make you a bad person. I've got to put that on the table. I want you to realize that in consciousness studies, remorse, being genuinely remorseful, guilty possibly, is different from self-condemnation. Do you understand that? Self-condemnation is what the ego child's mind does because it doesn't want to fix anything, doesn't want to look at it because it continues to condemn the self, so it would rather not look at what you're doing to yourself. But guys, we have to. And we have to realize it's very harsh and very unkind, and we wouldn't treat an animal or a person like that. And yet we treat ourselves like that. I often say here, and I want to put this on the table, you're writing a script. You are writing a script. And now let's take your child, your mother, your father, your animal, somebody that you love, your spouse, and let's write a script for them. Would you write self-condemnation? Would you write how horrible they are? Would you write that they have terrible experiences in life and they repeat this over and over and over again? You would not if you love them, and yet you write that script for you in your unawareness, in your fear. We all do. Until we don't. So it becomes extremely important, ladies and gentlemen, for you to become self-aware. Your path to greater consciousness is self-awareness to consciousness. And if you go enough, far enough in that, to enlightenment. This is the path. Good. All right. Number 2 tip. We do have to own up to what we did. We have to acknowledge, this is what I did. We have to own it. I often say you really can't surrender it to your highest self, to the God that is there in you as the aspect of you, until you own something. I think ownership is extremely important. I did this. Another image that I often use, sorry if I'm repeating myself to those of you who are who listen a lot, but I do want you to see how it fits into the whole, is you can't go next door to the house next door and sell anything in their garage. Why? If I say, why can't you do that? You'd say, it's not mine. Well, you can't surrender this truly in humility. Surrender what you need to surrender, like your shame, until you own it. But the little kid in you says, I'll die if I own it. There's the proof I'm a bad person. And I'm going to say to you, is that all you are? Is that all you are? Your answer, I think, is no. Because in addition to this thing that you did, and this thing that you often repeat in your unawareness, and unkindness to self, and unforgiveness of self, in that energy, even then, in your most truthful moment and thinking you're just horrible, there's some kindness in you. There's some graciousness. There's some caring. There's some love for others, if not yourself. You have done generous, good things. You've been sweet sometimes. It's not just about the bad. You see, people that condemn themselves only narrow their focus to what they have done wrong, or what they have, again, the sin of commission, omission. There's no such thing as that, guys. They're mistakes. That's all. I heard someone say that when the word sin was translated in Hebrew, it's a word that also means mistake. Now, is a mistake really a mistake if you learn something from it? I happen to believe not. I think that's how to get out of your mistake. You learn something from it, but if you avoid it, and if you sweep it under the rug, and if you continue to self-loathe, you're cutting that off. You're not learning anything from it. You're just repeating an old pattern from childhood. You see? Okay. I think too often we think we can avoid the ownership step, by the way. We don't want to own it because we're condemning ourselves. Guys, you're going to be just as wonderful as you are before, during, and after this process. There's no condemnation of self. I'm going to tell you, you are the authentic aspect of the ascended God you are. Issues get in the way. Issues get in the way. I think of an image of an hourglass, and the sand runs freely through that narrow little, well, hello, Keisha. Oh, I'm so glad that you're with us today. Thank you for being here. Good morning. If the sand runs through that narrow little channel, but issues clog that channel. Let's say moisture gets in there and the sand doesn't run down to the bottom. That's what issues do. They clog the channel. So all of this ascended God that you are, a living God, a God present in your life right now, can't be seen, can't be accessed, can't be created from because the channel's clogged with old issues, with old avoidance, because you'd rather not look at them. Consciousness says, let's look at those things. Let's get that sand running freely so we can really go on a journey, because your life is that sand and it's all going to run out one day. And we have to make this a good hourglass, a freely running thing. We do the best we can, and then we go. That's life, right? There's an interesting thing, because psychology has found, that self-forgiveness does little to motivate change in people, because the self-forgiveness is false. You have to have guilt. You don't have to have shame, by the way, but you have to have guilt to want to do something about things. You see? We have to develop a balanced reality here. And the balanced reality that I'm talking about is not only an acceptance of what is, but an acceptance of who we are. Here's the rub: at every stage of our conscious development. This whole idea that we are ashamed of self, instead of accepting, look, I did what I did because that was my awareness at the time, is what's required here. Anything else is like beating up an 8-year-old for not being able to drive a car. You're not supposed to drive a car at 8 years old. You don't have the awareness. You don't have the motor skills. Pardon the pun. Right? Okay. Of course, part of this also is the inflation and deflation of self. And I've just been talking about the deflation of self, but let's talk about the inflation of self, because all the narcissists that you see out there, and you've heard me lecture on narcissism because there are 3 kinds. I think this is a very important thing to say. There are 3 kinds. There's the exhibitionist narcissists. Look at me, I'm great. They don't tend to have the soft underbelly that the second category has. The second kind of narcissist is the closet narcissist, who hides their narcissism. You see many politicians doing that. It's all about self-aggrandizement, but they have the right talk on the top, right? And then you have the toxic narcissist. Thank God we don't see this very often. This is the kind of narcissism that goes with, say, a really hardened criminal, a Ted Bundy, The narcissistic personality disorder often goes with the antisocial personality disorder in its extreme, and also into sadism and that kind of thing. Okay. Now, the third tip. We have to make amends to self-forgive in some way. Self-forgiveness, psychology says, sticks more when we feel we have earned it, which I find a real interesting statement. Here's why. We're told in our, pardon me, my nose runs, and there's no way to disguise it on the radio except to go for my Kleenex. In cold weather, I think our noses run. I found out that wasn't just me. All right. We need to make amends. I think in our Judeo-Christian experience, we are told that God is an outside God, and that God only loves us when we try to be very, very good people, or good little boys and girls. That's what we learn when we're young, right? Well, that's not really the way this works. No. Certainly, consciousness believes that we are what we are. We're on a journey. It's all about energy. We become more and more closer to the oneness with all life. We find out that we are the channels for an ascended God in us. We try to clear out anything that's blocking that wonderful experience of self, true self, not the false self. Where's the earning in that? You see, I believe in consciousness we don't earn. God doesn't love us more because we're good little boys and girls. No, we open to being more the aspect of the conscious God, of the living God, of the ascended energies, because you remember, God presents two ways according to our understanding. As the fear-based self, that's still God, or as the love-based experience, which is the higher self experience of God. So you're either believing in the lack of things, which is the fear-based energy, or the abundance and fullness of things. And our journey is to go from the fear-based self to the love-based self. That's why we're here. That's what consciousness is. We become more aware, more aware, more aware. We start playing in the fields of consciousness. Keep going. You play in the fields of enlightenment. Keep going. Why not? Your life, it gets better. It improves. It's marvelous. You can't let unforgiveness of self stop you. And yet, we do. Why? Why? There's a lot to give the world, and believe it or not, that's a definition of your fulfillment. Finding out who you are authentically and adding that as value in some way, some creative way. And yet we feel that we have to earn something. And I'm going to say that, really it's not about earning, it's about opening. Know yourself. Know more and more and more. Don't be afraid. Don't look away. This article that I was quoting earlier, or saying earlier, had something interesting. They said that psychology recommends that if you have to punish yourself, that it be mild and time sensitive, time limited. I don't believe we should punish ourselves at all. Guys, you can either sit there and punish yourself, and when is enough enough? This is the thing. Somebody who's really into this and really programmed to punish themselves because they're taking it over because their parents punished themselves or them. And you naturally take that over because you think you need it when you get out of their house. It follows you. You're doing the same thing. That's your learned behavior. So you got to learn something else. That's it. So I don't believe in punishment of self. I believe in seeing everything realistically and making the world better with your knowledge. Learning something from the experience that helps yourself and others. Certainly, you make reparations in present time if that is allowed. You go and apologize. You say, I'm so sorry I did this. I really want to change and shift and grow. I think here of the addict that beats their spouse up over and over again and says, oh, I'm so sorry, that'll never happen again. Why does that not work? Why does it not work when the alcoholic says to you, oh, I'm so sorry about this binge and breaking all the furniture, I'm so sorry, never will happen again? You know why that doesn't work? It's because they don't mean it. This is just something to say. To forgive that little moment, it helps them save face, right? They feel like they have hooked you in so you don't leave, but they don't mean it. See, this has to be owned for it to stop. It has to be owned. Amends need to be made. All right. So many times when we have done something, the person is dead or they've moved on and there's no way we can make up for it. And I say, I go back to the adage, that wonderful adage. You're hearing me repeat some of this from last week, but I want to say it again because I think it's important. That wonderful Chinese adage that says the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago and the second best time is today. If you would like to contribute to this world, work on yourself. Turn all this energy of guilt and shame into self-forgiveness and forgiveness and compassion for others. Self-compassion, compassion for others. And then allow God to tell you how to use this marvelous wisdom that you have now had in you. Not in spite of what you did, but because of what you did. Don't you understand? This is the progression of energy. This is how to fix this. I think I told you several weeks ago that I accidentally ran over a dog one day and killed it outright on the expressway. I feel terrible about that. I love animals. I'll rescue anything in the world. I really will. Wild or domesticated, just let me at it. I think that one of the reasons I am so devoted to the animal kingdom is because of that experience. Because I can't do anything about that poor dog now. But I can do as much as I can for your dogs, for my dogs, and for the dogs that are in the pound and in other circumstances. I can certainly help where I can. I can certainly contribute in any way I can. That's what I mean. You see? There's something else here about making amends I want to put on the table, and it is this. We can't force ourselves to do any of this. Force is not a good thing. And many times we say, I should do it. If you're using a should, you're applying force. I'm going to put that on the table right now. And we don't, as human beings, don't respond to force. We have something in our cellular makeup called the pleasure pain experience. When we started out as one cell. Everybody did. A lot of information comes to that cell about growth and change, and so the cell divides, right? Or it dies. All that information is considered stress on the cell. More of you divided than died, so good for you. You're here. You did the hard part. Sometimes it doesn't feel like that, but you did. So we tend to equate life now on a cellular level. This is beyond consciousness, by the way. This is this is in our subconscious. We equate things that hurt with pain, force, and death because of the cellular experience we had long ago. And, well, thank you for that, heart. And we equate pleasure with living and dividing and all that kind of thing, right? Well, you've got to find out for yourselves that doing the work is a privilege. Instead of a force. You've got to think of making amends as freedom, as a privilege. I think that's one of my favorite words, privilege. I think that many of us don't know it because life, we say, is a burden. And if life is a burden, there's also a privilege there. And the big privilege is to open our minds, again, open the being to see something else, which is, no, underneath that was a privilege. I stopped too soon. I stopped at the burden part instead of allowing myself to deepen and work through. That's the key. Okay, another tip. Now we're going beyond the article that I took some of this lecture from. Is we've got to foster not only empathy, but the higher level of empathy, which is compassion for ourselves and others. Now, this is not going to come in the beginning of your work on yourself. It develops. Again, the thing that is marvelous about consciousness studies is you can't just turn them on like a light. Switch. All of a sudden, you forgive. All of a sudden, you're vulnerable because all this is in place. No, doesn't work that way. It is a process. Consciousness itself, enlightenment, all a process. Awareness, all a process. It's a very good process. The irony here is while your journey in this process is very different from anybody else's, and what you are going to contribute out of it is very different from anybody else's, there's some similarities. Like what you experience when you get there. Peace, awe for the whole system, compassion for self and all others, joy, creativity, heightened creativity, and much, much more. If you all want to know more about this, do pick up my first book. It is a hard read, but it's a hard read. It was so funny when I gave it to my team, and I think I wrote it quite frankly for the team that we all are. Everybody said, oh my God, this is the hardest book to read, right? Only because it was emotionally challenging. And now when I say, go back and pick up the chapters on this or that, they read and say, I have no idea why this was so hard to read. It's lovely. It's comforting. Okay? No longer challenging becomes comforting. Yeah? All right. We've got to develop not only empathy, but as I said, in consciousness, compassion for self and others. And they're different. Empathy is what it starts out to be before it develops into compassion. Many times, people that are not, when you're doing a physical exercise, in any of these programs that people develop, it's always good to have a coach because they're saying, you're extending your leg too far, pull it back a little bit, create more pressure, do this, do that. There are adjustments to make. Well, this is true in this business as well. And when we don't do this very well, this forgiveness thing, we tend to say we forgive and decrease our compassion so we can say it. That is not what we do. That absolutely shows we have a bit of self-righteousness attached to our forgiveness. I forgive you, right? I forgive you. You don't. Not until there's compassion. I coach a lot of families. I coach a lot of husbands and wives. I coach a lot of partners. One of the things that I say, and one of the things I teach is, let's have an argument. Let's see how to do this so that everybody feels safe. Let's make sure we get through. Let's make sure that, and there are just some things that I think society imposes on all of us that is just not good. Like, don't go to bed angry. I say, go the hell to bed angry, and make a case for how right you are and how wrong they are, and get through that for several hours, and then wake up in the morning and come off those very divisive poles to the middle of the field where you're emotionally vulnerable and talk and find a better solution the next time something like this happens. All right, we seem to have a caller. I'm going to go there and then I'll come back to our talk. So let's go there because I love talking to you guys. I hope I can bring you in. All right, here we go. This is a 267 exchange. To whom am I speaking today?
Hi, my name is Donna from Pennsylvania. Were you doing readings today?
Well, let's talk about that. First of all, what's your name? Donna?
Donna.
Okay. And you're from Pennsylvania. Donna, let's talk about what I do. I'm delighted to pick up anything that you need. I'm not a psychic, okay? I am a healer.
Okay.
So I can go into telling you anything you would like to know, but my focus is healing you and getting you on the way in a very conscious manner. I am delighted to do that.
Hello.
But it's a different experience. It looks the same to all of you all on the outside. It's quite different on the inside of me, I guess I say, and perhaps what I say. So what would you like to ask today, Donna? And we'll see what Spirit says about this. Are you there? Nope, she gave up on me. Okay. Guys, the reason you seek a psychic is because you're not listening inside. That's what I do. I try to train you to hear this, so you don't need one, okay? You are your own. For years, people have approached me and said, oh, I work on myself all the time. I have been working on myself forever. And I say, great, what have you done? And they say, I've seen a psychic every month. And I say, that's not what we do here. If you're not doing this for yourself ultimately, I'm not doing a good job for you. You understand? Oh, it's fun to be told. I love the little swami thing. That's great. But the fact is, you are your own. Okay. I'm sorry that who Donna gave up on us, because I'm delighted to answer any questions that one has. But, and certainly we can talk about healing through that, you know. All right. I think it's extremely important to acknowledge, when we're self-forgiving, we reach a point where it's important to acknowledge the system in a very humble manner. This is a fantastic system. of energy. That's the ascended God, and this whole, and then, by the way, and the ego and everything else, the whole system is perfect. We go from the fear-based self to the highest self, the love-based self. We learn so much if we're on this path. Everybody is on this path, by the way. But we are all going about it differently. The person who is now murdering somebody in a major city is on this path too. That's shocking, isn't it? But they believe that, they believe what they believe. I think everything cooperates with everything else. Believe it or not. There's a cooperation here beyond our understanding. So I don't believe that there are random acts. I think we're all in agreement in some larger spiritual level. All right, so the system, the whole energetic system of God, I think that we reach a point where we are very humble, where we feel this marvelous oneness. And in that, we must acknowledge, if God is everything, the light and the dark, the fear and the love, and everything in between, that we are that too. Therefore, I think it becomes extremely important for us to realize, yes, we indeed can cause harm. We indeed do cause harm. But we also have even a greater potential for creating and doing good. This is what you're going to find out when you discover the authenticity of who you really are. You can't fake it. You're going to find it and open to it. And it's there. No one was left out. All right, let's keep going. It's important to have a self-understanding. This is another part. I think this is what consciousness studies do. They take you past the personality, don't they? The personality, psychology stops with the personality. Let's correct this in the personality. Let's think a different way. Well, all of that is part of consciousness studies, but there is so much more, which is self-understanding to the point where you find a oneness with the ascended God you are, and you're still the ego child's mind, but you have a choice here. And it becomes very clear. You can either channel the ego child's mind and the part of you that thinks like a child and reacts and behaves like a child in certain circumstances, or you can channel what you know of God, what you know of love. In that, you can be vulnerable, because it's only the insecurity of the child that keeps you from being vulnerable and having all the advantages of that. And if you want to know what those advantages are, listen to 3 weeks ago, and our first talk on vulnerability, when we said, here's why you'd want it. Self-understanding, opening of consciousness. We have no longer the choice, or the reaction, I should say, it's not a choice, to justify what you've done. You've got to give up being right. We all do. If we're going to be really vulnerable, we just need to be. And that isn't being right anymore. That is realizing that there's a larger truth. When my husband and I argue, you know, he's right, I'm right, we both feel we're right, and just a little time goes by, and then it's like, is love more important or not? We always agree, yes, love is more important than being right. So we come to the center and we talk about it and we say, okay, here's the way it is. Let's do something different. We do something different next time. Guys, that's how to fix problems. Now, granted, some problems are more serious than others. That's a pretty easy way of fixing it. But you cannot then say, you always do this and bring the past. Now, guys, there are so many things wrong with that. Give up being right. It's a relief not to be right, okay? See, you're both right. I happen to believe that everything is right. Everything's truth, because somebody believes it, right? So if you stay there and argue on that level, nothing gets solved, because everybody's right. Okay. I also want to put on the table in developing self-understanding that everything's an excuse if it comes from the ego child's mind. All an excuse. I get real tickled that when we reach a certain point with clients, my work tends to become very easy when I say, and what's wrong with that? And the person will look at me a little shell-shocked and they'll say, I can't think of anything to say but excuses. Great. That's a big part of healing. Realize that you're making excuses and no longer believe them. Another point is there's something wonderful about realizing before the oneness with all life that there is a common humanity. You haven't done anything that anybody else hasn't done too. You're focusing on it too much. You've got some stuck energy, what we call fixations, in the past that you're dragging into the present. But for the most part, we're all capable of everything, all of us, when we're in the ego child's mind. I believe and don't believe people at the same time because everybody lies to themselves in the ego child's mind. We all think that we are great or we all think that we're lousy. Everybody is a bit of a narcissist in the ego child's mind. The ego child's mind is not the place where we are our most loving and creative. We are not necessarily inspired there, except little bits and pieces that come through when we are relaxed and not trying so hard to be the smartest person in the world. What if you're in a different energy? What if you're in a much higher energy where you're just listening to God all the time and you're just trying to speak right behind that and you're open to ideas and there's a great peace that everything is all right and something happens and you flow with it well and you have the language of articulation that you can figure out problems, you know? What about that? Well, that's the marvelous journey that humanity can go on, either together or individually. This is, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, you hear this in my book, The Life You Want. This is the age of individual consciousness. This is not the age for mass consciousness. This is individual consciousness. Our systems, I was talking about this with my cousin yesterday, our systems that have been in place for so many years, so many decades, have been to rely on our corporation to take care of us, our business. We had the traditional family, mother, father, and children in pecking order. We had our church that took care of us and our religion that we stayed within. And, you know, we had these things that we really relied on. We thought we made a mistake here, thinking that that was who we are. We were defined by the outside. Well, what do you think is happening now? All those outside institutions are being questioned, breaking down. I mean, our government is one of them, right? We have to trust our government. Oh, yeah? Guys, we're supposed to look within. This is what we're called to do right now, to develop individual consciousness. This is what we do. Guys, I am a compassionate person, really I am. And whenever I get dismayed by anything that is happening right now, I do realize this too shall pass. The Bible is filled, by the way, not that I am preaching the Bible, so I don't think I am that. We're completely secular here, and we talk about all sorts of things and all sorts of religions. But I, for years, did not understand a phrase in the Bible. And it came to pass that, fill in the blank, and it came to pass. Think of those words. And it came to pass. Everything comes to pass. I think that's good. Might make us value the moment a little bit more as a very special, spiritual, sacred moment. Do something good with it, okay? What happens when we forgive is certainly, and when we forgive enough, and when we develop self-compassion and everything that we're talking about here on these radio shows, we find a real oneness with all life. There is a shared humanity here. We have experienced the ego child's mind, maybe still experiencing it on some level, but we know a larger arena as well. I think that's very important, that you realize that that's out there for you, and a peace. The irony is when you know yourself really well, you also see how other people are motivated. Not that you're a mind reading, you're not doing that, but there's just a general understanding. And it's all right, because everybody gets to think and do what they need to do. We all have the right to live and die the way we choose. Now, we may not like someone's decision. I had a girlfriend that died 2.5 years ago now. I didn't like her decisions, but I supported her right to live and die the way she chose. And indeed she did. You can't do anything about it anyway. Do you realize that? There's a learning experience for that person, for that soul, that is beyond anything else. We have to accept it. I wouldn't want anybody interfering with the way I do it. Would you want anybody interfering with the way you do it? No. Okay. Another point is that we're all, ladies and gentlemen, on a spiritual journey. We really are. We too often think that we're on a physical journey with a little bit of spirituality sprinkled in somewhere, if we even give it time. But I'm here to tell you that you're nothing but the energy of God. Now you can be the energy of God in the fear-based self or in the love-based self. And it is natural to keep the energy moving. We all have stuck points. That's our fixations. Those are our energies. Listen to my programs, I should say, because I think it was quite the series on cognitive distortions. Those are stuck points. Those are fixations. We have to learn to get through them. A good coach can help you get through them. All right? We're on that spiritual journey. I define God, for those of you that are just tuning in, I define God as a infinite and ever-expanding set of truths, always in motion. There's always more to know about God. Hence, because God is all you are, there's always something more to know about you. Quite the journey. So, talking about self-forgiveness, I'm going to just repeat myself here for a minute. We have to take responsibility, ownership. We first all have to acknowledge, then own, take responsibility for what we have done. We need to feel remorseful, feel guilty about it. We've got to find out, by the way, something past the ego child's mind that says, we're going to die from it. You're not going to die from it. You're going to work through it and get on the other side, see what you can do about it. That's what's there. You find there's a way, number 3, to restore, right? You've got to make some sort of reparation. That means that you go and apologize or something, or you let that change your life. See, hitting the dog years ago would have been a terrible, senseless act if it didn't mean something to me and changed me from that point on. Don't you understand? My guilt about hitting that dog propelled me into acts of love. Let that happen to you. Or I could have said, I'm a horrible, horrible person, and I will just be an alcoholic for the rest of my life and not think about this again. The nice thing about drugs and alcohol is it helps avoidance. It is avoidance, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. And another point is then renewal. And I want to talk about that for a moment. In the ego child's mind, you'll say, oh, I have to start over. Oh, and we feel sorry for ourselves. Are we the perpetual victims or not? I say not, okay? I say that renewal, I say the reinvention of self is what you should be doing all the time. I say it's one of the healthiest things in the world. To take an assessment of you and your life and to make changes that one must make. To make you a better person and to contribute yourself to the world. It's very exciting to invent the self. You know, I say I had a little leg up on this only because of my theater and film experience. When you start out in that business, all full of the ego child's mind and that kind of thing, you say, you're doing this probably for the wrong reasons. You want attention. There's the right reasons because ultimately you seek something else if you do. But in the beginning, they'll say, we're looking for a tap dancer. And you say, I can do that. And you go out and you learn real fast, right? I was not ever a good tap dancer, but I could do whatever I needed to do because I was an actor who could dance, not a dancer who could act. Never. Can you play the cello? Oh, sure, I can play the cello. You have to say, oh, sure, if you're going to get the job in the beginning because you don't really have anything to sell except these little things, right? But it's all part of the system. It's all part of your progress. You start there, you end up somewhere else if you keep going. You grow out of the ego. You just want to do good work for people. You want to help. You find yourself not acting because you want attention, but acting to put ideas on the table, to communicate, to share, to help. I was talking to someone yesterday about, was it yesterday? No, it wasn't. It was the other day. I think I was in a doctor's office and the doctor said, I have a daughter who acts and she acts to, what did he say? It was marvelous. Oh, that she wouldn't do comedy because she thought it was beneath her. Well, I want to tell you, I think everything is spiritual. I think that can be one of the nicest things there are to make people laugh when they're troubled and when they're worried. So it's all part of our growing up, isn't it? And our becoming more mature and our thinking outside the boxes that we were in when we had the ego child's mind. Oh my Lord, 11 minutes left. Okay, let's click right along. There's something called a hindsight bias. And I want to talk about this quickly. This is people who have a hindsight bias feel that they should have been able to predict a negative outcome and someone who says that they could have done something about it. Now, oftentimes, a hindsight bias is not rational. This is certainly something that comes from the egoic child's mind. I should have, could have, would have, really important to recognize if you have that. And to focus instead of on self-condemnation, to focus on learning something from the experience and using it, letting it change you. You see, when we self-recriminate, we are not doing anything but that. We're not learning something from the experience and taking that energy into a different realm and doing something with it. And I urge you to do that, because that's really, really, that makes the world better. However, people often have this bias when they have experienced abuse and trauma and loss, when they feel they don't have any control over their lives anyway. I urge you, if that's you, for you to get straight with that and work with a counselor or someone who can certainly get you past that. You're all welcome to call my company, by the way. You can find my number on the internet. I'm Martha Novak, NOVAK.com. Please call me, and I can certainly put you with me or with another one of my marvelous people that I've coached. They're just terrific therapists. Remember, we do energy psychology here. That's what we do. Okay. We have to recognize unrealistic expectations of ourselves and of the world, and we've got to learn to live in reality. If you do not, you set yourself up for failure over and over and over again. And failure is not failure if you, number one, learn from it, number two, implement the changes that it requires. Okay. I think that's extremely important. This is a reality-based system, and I think it's really important. A lot of people don't have a very good experience of reality. It hurt, right? They say it hurt. And I say, so what? So what? It's part of life. We've got to learn to deal with those things and see how we're going to go forward from that point on. I am wondering, because I'm going to certainly be going into the last part of self-forgiveness before I go into the next bit. I'm thinking that I'm probably going to stop here with one thing to say here. I found a quote by Rebecca O'Dwyer, and I must say I do not know, but I thought this quote bore sharing and also talking about. The quote is this: "The only person we have the right or the power to forgive is ourselves. For everything else, there is the art of acceptance." I think this is an amazing quote. One of the things I want to put on the table here in the last 6 minutes is the art of acceptance. There's an art to everything. And in that art, there is a way to deal with it in its highest form. There's an art to communication, an art. Yes, implement. Peter just wrote, he said, implementing is the hard part. Knowing what to do is not as hard. Oh, thank you, Peter, for saying it's a good show. I appreciate that so much. I love hearing from you. So the art, for example, the art of communication is not just talking, it's knowing who you're talking to, right? And helping them understand and being kind to them and meeting them where you need to meet them. There is an art of accepting. Too easily we say, oh, I accept, when we don't accept at all. We have to realize that there is an art to accepting. It's very spiritual, it's very sacred. And the person we can change is us. The person we can change is us. We can put our ideas on the table. I can say, here are my ideas, but it's not my life to live, it's yours. So you can accept them or not. You can change them. You can do whatever you need to do there. You see? But you kindly accept, well, that's where she's coming from. Okay. So I think that's an incredible quote. The only person we have the right or power to forgive is ourselves. For everything else, there's the art of acceptance. I don't know who Rebecca O'Dwyer is, but hey, I like you. And so there we are. Guys, we have 4 minutes left. I want to say thank you so much for listening. You know what you can do for me, because I'm delighted to do these shows with you. I really am. I have so much fun talking with you all, hearing your comments, and certainly getting the phone calls that I get. I want to say that you can do a lot for me by going into social media and talking to your friends about the show. If you've enjoyed this, please do. And like us and befriend us. And what else is there? Share and like. And, oh, I said that one. You can see how often I'm on social media. I don't do it very often, but we really do rely on it here to get the word out about this show. So please do. It would be very meaningful if you would. We certainly are, as a small organization, try to get the word out about what we do here. And I do these Sunday morning shows for you so that we can. All of our shows are archived. They're archived on Blog Talk Radio, Facebook Live, and YouTube. So you can go back and listen to anything that you want. And thank you so much for listening today. Thank you for all of you all that wrote in. Means the world, by the way. And I'm sorry that Donna didn't stay on the phone. Donna, you were certainly welcome to stay on the phone. I just wanted to tell you that we do something a little different, so you wouldn't be surprised by the answer. That's all I was setting up. Guys, have a wonderful week. And I hope that you will implement some part of what we're talking about now. But be good and gracious and kind to yourself, because God loves us through us. So we do need to wake up to how we are harsher to ourselves than need be. So God loves you through you. You make it a good week, okay? I'll see you next Sunday at 10 o'clock in the morning Eastern Standard Time. Have a wonderful time. Have a great week, and we're in the holiday season, so make it a good one, okay? Talk to you next week. Bye-bye.